The psychologist took a sip of her uklu and turned back to the terminal. Ornella and Fausto Arcuti, sister and brother. 22 local years and nearly 16. Citizens of the orbital station Heliotrope. The exotic tour trip was a gift from their parents. Ornella recently graduated with honors from the university in Helsinki, and Fausto was just accepted there. Ornella is a pretty flirt, a bit frivolous, but smart and not vulgar. Every man on the flight was all over her, crew included. Not to speak ill, but sometimes they even succeeded. The boy's not bad either. Curious, a bit of a glory chaser. Drank in moderation, didn't interfere with his sister. He worships Zuberbuller, laughs along with Podolian, and can't stand Vorontsov. That's enough, Scotch interrupted, making a final note. And the last participant. Germa glanced at her files. Patrice Duel. 27 local years. Citizen of Ophelia, registered aboard the Azure Whisper. A fragile, melancholic brunette you were ogling too. Vadim. Why not ogle? Scotch replied. Blandly. Beautiful women deserve to be ogled. I ogle you too, Germa. Don't mind him, girl, Valti snorted. Scotch has always been a hound. Even his dog was like that. Chased anything that moved, even those feline freaks. Ended up badly, of course. Oh, come on. Scotch feigned offense. My own subordinates calling me a hound. How's a man supposed to work under such conditions, huh, Germachka? Shall I continue? The psychologist didn't even try to hide her amusement, but kept her focus. Patrice is a journalist. She's gathering material for a book. Her profession's taken her through all kinds of trouble across the inhabited galaxy, and even some uninhabited sectors. Her father's some bigwig in the France 7 and New Caledonia Alliance, and her mother is the daughter of Amazonia's president. So, the girl's been part of high society since birth, but she doesn't flaunt it. Personally, I think you won't have trouble with her. Germa took another sip of her uklu and concluded, and a brief overall summary. The group would be close to ideal were it not for the presence of Vorontsov and, to some extent, Podolian. The wild cards are the shapeshifter and Semyonov. The rest lean more positive than negative. That's all from me. Thank you, darling, said Scotch, making a final note and turning off the notepad. Excellent rundown. No kidding. That wasn't a compliment, by the way. Liar, Valti snorted again. He means it sincerely, but yeah, it is a compliment. Take it as such. Right. Scotch switched to a mock official tone. Instructor Valen, on your feet and do your rounds. Joel, main Führer. Valti clicked his heels. Would have made a sound if not for the soft, porous rubber soles. Honored to depart. Chuckling, he left the office. Nothing official had really happened. Friendly teasing was fair game at this outpost. The show of discipline didn't mean much. Here, the work got done by inner sense of duty, not barking orders. Impossible to work with this kind of staff. Scotch complained with theatrical indignation. They're slicing the soles right off my boots. So, Germa, what are you doing this evening? He abruptly changed topic, knowing surprise attacks had a higher success rate. The psychologist had already tucked her terminal away in her bag. She listened to his pitch with a knowing smile. You really are a hound, Vadim, she concluded. Tonight, I'll probably be eating shashlik. Rumor has it you're organizing that. And drinking what you offer me. As for later, we'll see. I don't have any concrete plans, and I wasn't planning to go back to the liner. Perfect. Scotch beamed. Then come on, I'll show you to your quarters personally. Despite some issues with the group, the first day of work was shaping up nicely. The day of arrival also featured a popular lecture with holoprojections about the nature of Tabasco. It all wrapped up with the traditional welcome banquet, which slid smoothly into a late-night picnic, which in turn flowed into a cheerful, boisterous booze-up. As expected, a few participants truly distinguished themselves, dead drunk by the end of the night. The Ponzi Denis Vorontsov, a cop, Trench, Podolian, and the underage Fausto Arcuti. The others ended the night thoroughly tipsy, except for the somber Valentina Kilko and the enigma Vladimir Semyonov, who barely drank. Even the uptight Ganilla bot had mellowed by midnight, which her mischievous husband quickly took advantage of, mellowing right along with her. There was one unpleasant incident. Early in the picnic, while still relatively sober, Vorontsov supposedly accidentally spilled wine on Semyonov from a silver goblet and didn't even bother to apologize. Semyonov calmly wiped himself off with a napkin and asked Scotch if there was a public shower closer than the one in his cottage. Vorontsov loudly called him a wimp and a coward. Scotch waited a moment. Watching Semyonov's reaction, Semyonov merely smiled. It seemed indulgent. That was enough for Scotch. He stood, grabbed Vorontsov by the collar without ceremony, and demanded he apologize to his fellow hiker. Vorontsov tried to raise his fists, but Valty approached from the side and, with one convincing gesture, talked him out of it. "Mr. Vorontsov," said Scotch with insufferable solemnity, every word soaked in pretentious empathy, "allow me to remind you that, as of today, we are one big family. Also, per clause 5.3, subsection 2 of the tourist contract you signed, the guide instructor has the right to exert any influence on a client deemed necessary within the limits specified in that same subsection. If you've forgotten, the only action strictly forbidden is physical termination. So, I strongly suggest, Mr. Vorontsov, that you promptly apologize to Mr. Semenov and refrain from any further awkwardness. Do I make myself clear?" Vorontsov mumbled something incoherent, yanked his arm from Scotch's grip, and dryly muttered an apology to Semenov. The latter accepted it without a flicker of emotion and trudged off to the shower. Vorontsov then set about getting steadily drunk, which Scotch didn't mind at all. Client's on vacation, after all, and so long as he's not bothering anyone. It's his right. They drifted apart near dawn, many of them in pairs. Vorontsov and Podolian had spent the whole evening trying to charm the coquettish Ornella Arcudi, but she left with Zuberbuller in the end. Patrice Duel had no trouble at all wrangling the drunken Arcudi Jr. Valentina Kilko stared long and mournfully at Semenov, but he was the first to leave, alone. Later, Solyanka made a clumsy attempt at flirtation, but Valentina walked away solo too. Meanwhile, Scotch's evening-long peacocking before Germa paid off. She took his arm and led him to her cottage, much to the dismay of Martina, who, out of spite, finally gave in to Hidden's bashful advances. Next morning, Scotch was up early, a bit underslept, but surprisingly chipper. First thing, he checked to see if the rescue team had already left for the route. They had. Then he shook Little awake, demanded hangover pills and brine, and set off to rouse the group. They didn't wake easily, but Scotch was a seasoned pro. The bots opened up almost immediately. The hangover pills were met with heartfelt gratitude, and within 15 minutes they were all feeling brand new. Zuberbuller had already woken up and gotten himself together, wandering the resort since early morning. Scotch chatted briefly with him. From last night alone, it was obvious the guy was a seasoned traveler, a real gem. He didn't need the pills, but took some anyway, to treat the charming, flirty Ornella. Patrice and Arcudi Jr. were slower to respond. Eventually, Patrice found the strength to get to the door, scantily dressed, but still decent and clearly suffering. From the night before, Scotch gave her brine and a couple of pills, and she perked up almost instantly. Arcudi Jr. initially resisted the pills, but Scotch convincingly lied that he'd already taken for himself that morning. Arcudi Jr. found no argument against that and swallowed them. He, too, was soon on the mend. Patrice assured Scotch they'd be ready for breakfast in half an hour to an hour, clearly meaning local time, not base time, since only 50 minutes remained till breakfast. Vorontsov didn't open the door at all, so Scotch used his key. Vorontsov glared, but without malice, suggesting his memory of the previous evening was patchy. He refused Scotch's pills, claiming to have his own. Scotch, feigning interest and curiosity, asked to see them. Vorontsov, eager to show off, unveiled some absurdly expensive Silentian biopharmaceuticals. Scotch clucked his tongue in admiration, promised to try them next time, and left satisfied. If Vorontsov took them, he'd be fine in no time. If not, well, let him suffer. His call, shapeshifter Nutty Nagudi let Scotch in immediately and declared he felt great. He'd barely touched alcohol, but had spent the evening smoking some ritual herb. Fortunately, it was lethal to humans, so whenever drunken tourists tried to share a puff, Ains gently stopped them. Shapeshifters suffered no after effects. Scotch joked that humans had it much harder in that regard. They both laughed and parted on good terms. Comedian Podolian intercepted Scotch on the way to Simonov's cottage, gratefully received his dose of relief, and dashed off to the lake with A. Triumphant hollered, "As expected." Simonov answered the door promptly. He'd barely drunk the night before and didn't need any medicine. Scotch asked a few polite questions and received polite, supremely vague answers in return. Then he headed to the final cabin, Valentina Kilkos. She was already up, though, no less melancholic. A brooding tourist on the trail spelled trouble. Hangover medicine wasn't necessary. Scotch talked to her for a good 15 minutes, careful not to pry. She seemed deeply grateful for that. She even promised, unprompted, not to mope or cause any trouble for the exotic tour staff. "My dear lady," said Scotch, "what trouble? It's my duty to entertain and assist you, and I shall do both with all my heart." By the end of their conversation, Valentina was even smiling. As for the resort staff, the rescuers, and the service girls, they all knew how to recover after the kickoff picnic, especially since Scotch had already handled the hardest part of the protocol, waking up Mr. Little, Vitaly Akulov, the lanky, even taller than Solyanka caretaker of the base. In his secret stash, you could find anything your heart desired, right? Down to the needle that held Kashiai's death. After breakfast, Scotch let everyone rest a bit more and then launched a grueling gear training session. In just 90 minutes, tourists were confidently setting up twin-module tents, packing backpacks, and activating their built-in anti-grav compensators, climbing trees, and the single artificial cliff brought here from God knows where, possibly from the neighboring continent, navigating artificial swamps in pairs and trios. Instructors, Scotch and Valti darted about like dervishes, adjusting, explaining, demonstrating do's and don'ts, barking orders, cracking jokes, swearing under their breath. They were fully in the groove. Vorontsov kept making faces, but when they showed him just how useless his gear was for scaling the aforementioned cliff, he went quiet. Scotch caught him at the last moment, using the emergency grab of the anti-grav harness, just before Vorontsov could crash down onto the jagged granite fangs at the base of the rock. Naturally, Scotch had done it on purpose. He could have grabbed him earlier. "Your gear's no good," Zuberbuller told Vorontsov with disarming calm. "It's quality, sure, but not for Tabasco. Look, see the G- tag? Know what that means? This sets for planets with reduced gravity. Different loads, different climb dynamics, different fastening techniques altogether." Vorontsov, pale and sullen, kept glancing sideways at the bright red label stitched across the signature guy's gear case. G+ is for increased gravity, Zuberbuller continued explaining. G++ for the extreme limit of what's tolerable for humans, like Gondwana or Sarazad bones. Just G for Earth-like gravity, give or take a tenth. G0, that's enough, Vorontsov muttered darkly. "I get it. I'm not an idiot." He gave the innocent case a sharp, angry kick. Then, without another word, he accepted the gear issued by the tourist base and headed for the cliff. "He's beginning to crack," Scotch noted with satisfaction. "But you have to hand it to him, stubborn and fearless. A proper guy. Even if a total blockhead, a cop Podolian knew almost everything he needed to, in theory. But in practice, every move he made came out clumsy and wrong, like he was working backwards. He clipped the carabiner to the wrong loop, crossed the rope unnecessarily, threaded the safety leash the wrong way. Halfway up a towering cedar maple hybrid, one of his boots came flying off. The sturdy plastboard mock step beneath him simply snapped in two, and he sank waist deep into a slimy, semi-liquid bog. While pitching the tent, Podolian managed to headbutt the graviframe support, causing the whole structure to collapse, leaving poor Akop crawling around in the dark trying to find the exit. Everyone laughed and jeered, but Podolian laughed louder than all of them and fired back cheerful insults from inside the tent. The bodies were trying harder than anyone. This was their first ever expedition to an uncolonized world. They simply hadn't been able to afford it before. Brother and sister Arkady gave it their all, too. So did Patrice Duhale, despite having far more field experience than most girls of her social tier. She knew how to pitch a tent flawlessly, could climb like a pro, and had brought her own backpack, an excellent one, even better than the ones issued at the base. It wasn't until they reached the bogs that Patrice hesitated. Naturally, Scotch was quick to offer help, give guidance, and provide instruction. The unflappable shapeshifter Nudinagudi gave it his all as well. 3 times, he underwent minor metamorphoses, just as they'd agreed, subtly and discreetly. Only Scotch, Valti, and possibly Semenov noticed. Before tackling the cliff, he transformed the inner surface of his hands to stick to stone. Before facing the cedar maples, he secretly grew claws. And before wading into the bog, he modified his skin to repel water. Semenov was also putting in effort. Scotch and Valti still couldn't agree. Was this whole tourist business new to him or not? He handled gear and assignments with decent efficiency, but never pushed himself too hard and always delivered results just slightly below average. By lunchtime, everyone arrived tired, hungry, and pleased with themselves. Scotch loudly announced that after a rest, they would begin weapons familiarization and test firing, followed by launch shortly after dinner. He recommended that during lunch, guests either abstain from alcohol or limit themselves to a single glass of beer. Vorontsov, with a hint of provocation, asked whether splitting a bottle of whiskey with someone would be considered a crime. Scotch replied that it wouldn't be criminal, but he wouldn't be allowed near a weapon and definitely wouldn't be using his personal firearm. Vorontsov then asked what the upper limit for shooting eligibility was. 70 grams, Scotch snapped. Not a gram more. Vorontsov drank whiskey with Podolian. Just 1 shot each. The rest of the group, shapeshifter included, visibly enjoyed their beer after the rest break, during which Scotch made sure to stop by the quarters of the post-partying gourmet Bago. The training resumed. As expected, Zuberbuller, Vorontsov, and Podolian were all proficient with knives and machetes. The last, though, was a bit of a wild card. Scotch mulled it over and decided to take a small risk. He initiated a knife-throwing trial, something that normally wasn't allowed for tourists. He invited Semenov to go first if the man was flustered. He showed it only for a fraction of a second. Then, without hesitation, he threw the 5 issued knives in quick succession. 1 hit the 5 ring, 1 landed in the bushes, 1 hit the 9, 1 missed entirely, and the last buried itself dead center. Predictably, no one else could be held back after that. Everyone wanted a turn. To Scotch's mild surprise, Podolian hit the bullseye with all 5 knives. Vorontsov scored 47. Patrice Duhale, 42. Valentina Kilko and the younger Arkady sibling tied at 39. Zuberbuller only managed 24, though he'd honestly warned them he could handle knives but didn't know how to throw them. Ornella Arkady managed to lodge just 1 blade near the target. The bodice didn't manage a single hit. Nudie Nagudi, chuckling, ignored the target altogether but carved a neat, diagonal cross into a tree trunk twice as far away. The high overall score surprised Scotch. Usually, very few tourists knew how to throw knives. Those who did rarely booked with exotic tour. That left shooting practice. A full hour was spent familiarizing everyone with the hunting-grade plasma rifles and their ammunition. By this point, the clients were so well drilled they responded to every instruction instantly and without question, even Vorontsov. He didn't even take his personal rifle out of its case. Apparently, he didn't want to humiliate himself again in front of the others. Naturally, a cop Podolian couldn't help himself, At one point, he snatched a plate of cookies from Ganilla, dumped them in the grass, and hurled the dish high into the air, then shattered it mid-flight with a perfect shot. Most of the tourists, including a cookie-less Ganilla, erupted in applause. Scotch, however, immediately tore into him with a scolding. Not that Podolian seemed even slightly remorseful afterward. Just before dinner, Valti handed out magazines with 10 rounds each. And of course, to the delight of all, a marksmanship competition followed. The shooting order was determined by casting a hepatode die inscribed with glyphs. The results left Scotch mostly satisfied. Fausto Arcudi, 74 out of 100. Tenabat, 52. Denis Vorontsov, 98. Patrice Duhale, 92. Nudi Nagudi, a perfect 100, with the impact marks forming a comical little smiley face. No surprise there. The shapeshifter had likely altered his eyes and tuned his reflexes. Konstantin Zuberbuller, 96. Ganilla Bot, 24. Valentina Kilko, 65. Ornella Arcudi, 40. Akop Podolian, 100. And finally, Vladimir Semenov, 75. Once again, Scotch couldn't tell. Was Semenov deliberately holding back, or was he just an average shooter? During dinner, Scotch kept a close watch to make sure Vorontsov and Podolian didn't sneak in any extra drinks. Afterward, he handed each participant a packing list and gave them an hour to prepare. Then he rushed off to say goodbye to Gurmit. We set out 2.5 hours before sunset. Naturally, only after a personal check of each tourist, no rummaging through bags, but a firm quality control of the packing job. Solyanka, Zban, and Hidden had reported in advance from the first waypoint camp that the initial 5 supply points had been stocked with regular rations, along with 5 more containing emergency packs. Just before departure, Mr. Little rolled up to Scotch and tearfully begged to join the group. Claimed he was sick of sitting at the base surrounded by the female staff and just needed to get out and breathe. Hell with it, Scotch snorted. Fine, go. But don't expect any special treatment. You'll work like the rest. And with a wicked grin, he advised him to run over to the quartermaster for gear. All right, gentlemen, are we ready? Scotch asked, looking over the group that a ragged chorus of affirmation rumbled back. No one forgot anything? Heartburn pills? A hologram of your beloved mother-in-law? Your favorite smoking pipe? Just keep in mind, we're not turning back, not even if you remember 5 minutes after we start. The group responded with a chorus of no. Well then, on behalf of Exotic Tours on Tabasco, I congratulate you all on the beginning of your journey. Onward to adventure. Even the seasoned Zuberbuller and the flashy Vorontsov got swept up in the excitement. The group responded to the lofty banality with a raucous cheer. Even the quiet Semenov mumbled something cheerful. Formation order. Scotch kept the mood light but businesslike. He pulled out a plastic sheet with the printed roster. Lead, Instructor Valen. Just call him Valti. Valentin was the first to step onto the path, momentarily turning his back to the unbroken wall of green forest. Patrice. The Frenchwoman eagerly followed Valti onto the trampled trail. Fausto? Then Ornella. There were 4 now on the trail. Kostya. Denis. Nudi Nagudi. A cop. For short, Trench. Podolian chimed in, laughing at his own joke. Ganilla. Tinter. Valia. Vlad. And Mr. Little and I will bring up the rear. Keep alert on the march. Eyes wide, heads on a swivel. Follow instructor commands quickly and without chatter. Remember what you signed in the contracts. Ready? Ready. Hip hip. Hooray! The group roared. Well then, Scotch turned to Germa, hugged and kissed her. See you soon, baby. I'll miss you. Scotch knew. He was lying. And Germa knew he was lying. He wouldn't miss her. But Scotch also knew the petite psychologist needed to hear it. And Germa genuinely liked hearing it. So why not say what someone wants to hear? An old-as-time game of parting words. Scotch, Little, and Valti waved to the support staff, seeing them off. Valti march. His partner, for the umpteenth time in his life, turned to face the woods and took the first step of yet another tour, spitting 3 times over his left shoulder as he went. The short column of tourists started walking away from the tour base and soon disappeared under the canopy of Tabasco's primeval forest. Just before sunset, the woods were calm. The daytime creatures were worn out and quiet, while the nocturnal ones hadn't yet left their dens. Angled sunbeams pierced the canopy here and there, scattering a mottled quilt of light across the undergrowth. The trail, gently winding, stretched ahead and vanished from view just 20 or 30 paces away. The first camp was just over 7 kilometers down the path. No surprises were planned for the first leg. There were usually enough natural ones. The group was getting used to the forest, the packs, the gear, the walking, in short, getting used to exotic tours. They reached the camp almost without incident. The almost, predictably, involved a cop Podolian. While fiddling with the weight compensator on his backpack, he managed to set it in the wrong direction. Instead of lightening the load, he made it heavier. Naturally, the trip's designated clown gave a squeaky yelp as the pack suddenly gained a good 150 kilos, and he toppled backward like a flipped-over dung beetle, even flailing his legs in the air. His boots chirped as they freed him from the overload, and for the next 15 minutes, the only topic of conversation was the marvels and miseries of tourist backpack compensators. The group eagerly flaunted their newly learned terminology, trying hard to mimic the seasoned veterans. The instructors, Zuberbuller and Patrice with Valentine at the camp. Tents were pitched quickly and with surprising skill. Scotch, taking Zuberbuller and Semenov as assistants, headed off to gather firewood. The ever-aimless little tagged along, despite Scotch snapping at him. "Keep hissing, and I won't give you any of the alcohol," barked the quartermaster, cutting the guide off with cynical efficiency. Not even the nominal director of the tour base had a comeback to that kind of threat. What could he do? He had no choice but to go along. Present day? Search Raider Schuster. Epsilon, 75 Prong, 32. Tabasco, a Terran Dominion. Strangely enough, it was Sonya Veselov, and not the foreman or the navigator, who got the honor of being the first to set foot on the surface of this unknown planet. At first, Sonya was surprised, but then he figured it out. From this moment on, the foreman, the navigator, and the crabby science ladies were all custodians of highly classified intel. Sonya, of course, knew plenty too, but aboard the Raider, he was, for the time being, the least valuable crew member. The advisor from Foucault was arguably even less useful, but let's be honest, who'd expect anything sensible from him in a situation like this? And so, the foreman grimly unlocked the safe, pulled out a hefty standard-issue beam gun, and handed it to Sonya. "Here. Your task. Scout the area, figure out if survival outside's even remotely feasible. Ideally, find a good spot for the first camp and a depot, somewhere we can stash food, supplies, and valuable equipment. A cave or something like that. You've got 3 hours. If you find nothing, come back. If you do, we'll adapt." Questions? Sonya swallowed hard and glanced uncertainly at the weapon. "It's a jungle out there, Cadet," Shaliko explained from his chair, not unkindly. "Critters go chomp-chomp. And you're dear to us, even if you are a right little rascal." Sonya found the logic sound, at least as far as the local wildlife was concerned. Facing some alien tiger unarmed wasn't quite the same as meeting it with a beam gun in hand. He didn't know where to aim, head, chest, wherever, but in burst mode. He'd slice the beast to ribbons either way. As for his own worth to the senior crew, Sonya had his doubts. If they valued him that much, why'd they ride him so hard the whole trip? Cadet this, cadet that. He wasn't even a cadet anymore. Well, okay, not 100 years out of training, but 7.5 at least. 12 missions under his belt. And not just the short ones, though most were 2 or 3 maybe 4-monthers. There had been 2 full deep runs already. This was his third. Still, deep down, he knew his grumbling came from wounded pride more than anything else. It's not like the old-timers, the foreman or his deputy, We're going to scrub bulkheads themselves after a colloid tank depressurized and blew. And he was the youngest. So yeah, cadet, get to it. Chin up, cadet, said Timurik, giving him a fatherly pat on the shoulder. Good luck. And Sonya set off. He pulled on a work suit and hollow-soled boots, secured the ops helmet for field atmospheres, hooked up his trackers, tiny things, but if they'd been any bigger, he'd have looked like a walking Christmas tree. Slinging the beam gun across his chest, he took a deep breath and headed for the airlock. All 6 of them had already taken BioBlock and anti-allergen injections after landing, though the stubborn advisor had kicked and resisted the whole time. Fine. Die if you want. The acting medic Plusnik had finally snapped. But don't blame me. Not as your doctor, and not as acting captain. Oddly enough, the Latin worked on Paulista. He caved. Plusnik immediately jabbed his injector into the man's forearm and pulled the trigger. When the airlock doors hissed open, the first thing Sonya did was inhale the air of this new world. It smelled sharp, flowers, wet leaves, rotting algae. A wild, untamed scent of primeval life, untainted by industrial waste, engine fumes, or the choking remnants of techno-civilization. Tabasco had its own charm. Pungent, sure, especially after months in a sterile shipboard atmosphere, but not unpleasant. Hello there, Sonya said to the planet as he stepped onto the hull. Hope you don't bite. The raider was floating in a local river. Strange stilt-legged trees jutted out of the water here and there. In their canopies, something chirped, clicked, whistled, hissed, and hooted nonstop. If the ship's landing had scared the jungle critters, it hadn't lasted long. It had been nearly an hour, after all. The hull had cooled, not by itself, of course. The embedded chillers saw to that. The water was crystal clear, revealing a bottom coated in algae. Something down there was wriggling about. No doubt the locals had come to check out the thing that fell from the sky. Could it be food? Better yet, tasty food? Sorry to disappoint, river folk. Sonya knew the depth here didn't exceed half a meter, so he waded toward the lower bow section and jumped in confidently. The water layer was indeed shallow, but the muck beneath. Sonya sank almost to his knees, with water reaching just above his waist. Fortunately, not a single drop seeped into his boots or suit. Squelching and grunting, he trudged through the ooze toward the nearby shore. Soon the muck thinned. Walking became easier, until something latched onto his boot, hard enough to make him yelp in pain. The thing looked like a giant crab and was trying to crack his boot open with both pincers. Sonya grunted and smacked its shell with the butt of his beam gun. Off, you little bastard. What's going on out there? Came the voice in his earpiece. The old-timers were clearly concerned. Didn't even make it to shore, and something already tried to take a bite, Sonya grumbled. Some local crab. Hurt like hell. The crab finally let go after the hit, though it clearly didn't enjoy being lifted out of the water, either. In the murk stirred up by his flailing, Sonya caught a glimpse of something big. Fish or reptile, didn't matter. He decided it was high time to move his ass to dry land. The last thing he needed was to be dinner for some local alligator. Nothing else dared touch him after that, which Sonya took as a good omen.